Hi, this is Kate from Contemporary Geometric Beadwork. I'm going to deconstruct a 2-drop podcast set for you. And as I take this apart, you'll see this beautiful diamond-shaped ruffled edge come off, revealing a square coil and a 2-drop spine. And when those are gone, you'll see that on top of this orange, this section here is 12 rounds of 2-drop rickrack. This was a PodCast bead built in 2-drop on a 22 bead ring, and I have it temporarily tied together here at the back. So the first thing that I'm going to do is release the tie that I had in place only for my own convenience while I was building the coil. It's a lot easier to work on a piece that doesn't have a lot of extra points sticking up to catch the thread. You can imagine how many more times the thread gets caught when you're dealing with a lot of points like this. So, everything has its own detonation points. And here's one for the spine and coil section. And so the first thing that I'm going to do is cut these off. And then this is the other side. I try to color code my detonation points, and you can see that the pink here actually will match the first round of the spine. And then I actually jumped across from point to point to start the spine. Let me show you this thread here. This little thread right here that I'm going to cut. When I was doing the spine, instead of doing it in the round, I actually just jumped across with my needle after I put my first rounds of beading in, and then I went over there. So this is also something I can cut because these things have all been reinforced. And you see that one of the detonation points I cut was for the spiral, the other one was for the spine. So I think it would be most fun to take them off together, which is what I'm going to do. So I'll just encourage the spine to come off here, and we'll leave the coil attached for now. Now that the spine and coil, which are remaining attached for now, are coming off, about halfway off, you can see that this is going to be a very satisfyingly long piece, and it's willing to stack up as pentagons, squares, or to be a beautiful Greek key pattern, but its favorite thing to be seems to be squares. I tend to go around deconstructions like this and do snipping, but if you want to leave detonation points all the way along the trail, then you can just cut all of the detonation points and this will just lift right off for you. I don't mind doing this, and I kind of like inspecting the edge, so I tend to do this by hand, just sort of gently teasing out the thread and then snipping it off. You have to be sure what you're cutting, but I am. And if you aren't sure, then use more detonation points rather than fewer. I left detonation points in the rickrack as well, but it's fairly easy to see where to cut, even in 2-drop when you're working with a rickrack. And detonation points, remember, just because you cut a thread doesn't necessarily mean your beadwork is going to come apart. My first round of work on the rickrack is just on top of the orange, so this first yellow round. And so just like in a 1-drop, I'm only going to cut the thread between the new work and the old. And this will separate the rickrack from the pod. And you can tease this apart, just like we did with the coil, but I greatly prefer to go and actually cut the threads on the rickrack and just lift it away from the pod. As you can see, what I'm cutting here is the single exposed thread where the new work went on. So I'm cutting the thread that put on the first round, and only that thread. And it's neatly exposed. So it's actually quite easy to catch in 2-drop. Just be sure you're cutting the first round away. Okay. Once I've snipped all the way around, I always think it's kind of fun to just take it down to the point where I can still see the attachment in context. So beautiful. Let me move the coil for a moment. In fact, I think this is so lovely that, many times I'm often tempted to leave the flower and the podcast together and finish them as some sort of crazy brooch. But at any rate, they're beautiful together. Once you've snipped one first line of increases, the podcast bead just will gently come away. Presuming that you never went back to reinforce this work into here, which I didn't, and that you were able to snip every thread. So these threads just pull out. Sometimes you have to snip and pull, right? But this is just the waste thread from round 1, and it all comes away. And so let me clean up these pieces, and then I'll show you what we've got. So from this podcast bead, which was 22 points and 6 units per side, I built 12 rounds of rickrack, which is certainly going to be a little bit too big for me. Right? I have extra bangle here. So if I wanted just a rickrack like this, I could count the number of points. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 extra points here. I could count the number of points that I need and create one that was exactly the size for a bangle. But my intention with this piece is to continue to modify it by adding an all increases section to it that we call an all wing. So I'm going to be tailoring this one to fit. And as mentioned in the instructions, if you wanted to make a neck piece, we suggested making 12 rounds of rickrack in the flat. And if you wanted to make a bangle to tailor, we suggested 12 rounds of rickrack in the round. And of course, this makes a fantastic flower too. It's so easy to just sew these together in the middle with or without ornament and create fantastic lightweight coat brooches and things like that. The coil and the spine still need finishing, because what I need to do is go through the spine itself, which is just these 3 rounds of color here, right? These 3 rounds right here, and add the stitch in the ditch round that will go in and out through the red beads, red and orange beads in the spine. So my first job is to reinforce the spine with the stitch in the ditch round and then remove it. And then I'll be free to build onto this coil. And when the coil has just a few more rounds on it, it'll be very well behaved like this one. And as I say, using the hexagon increase as I have here, the coils show a strong preference for squares, but can also be coaxed into pentagons. So you'll see more of these pieces as we go along, but I just wanted to show you my deconstruction. Doing my stitch in the ditch row on the spine is an easy start. I put my thread in about an inch or so from the end, weave through a few beads, leave a little tail, and then just begin sewing. And when you're at the end of the spine, you have a lot of choices in whether you want just a plain finish or if you want to have a loop. And in this case, if I just put the 2 beads on and turn around, I'll be encouraging a plain finish, and I'll go back and reinforce these 2 beads by square stitching them basically to the other 2 beads at the end, so that it'll just look like a natural little 3-bead triangle down here at the end. But if I wanted to, it would be easy enough for me to add a loop. And I generally do enjoy adding loops to spines. And you can see at the end of this spine, I added a couple of loops in just round seed beads. I like size 15 seed beads for that. So if at the end of this spine I was interested in adding a loop, I would do that now. I would just pick up the beads on my needle from one track, go into the other track, and then leave that there. I would normally do that on the second or third round so that I had an opportunity to reinforce the loops on one or two of the turnarounds. I generally never do anything like that on the first round of work because that thread will be removed, and so you don't want any complications like that. No permanent work on the first round of thread. And so now you see that I've changed direction, reinforced the end. This is really a piece of cake. I can just come straight back through these beads that I've already put on and then proceed to add the rest of the stitch and ditch to the spine. And you can easily see that just like building this spiral on the pod, it's a needless complication to build any of the spiral before you finish your spine. So I did this just to say that I did and to make sure that it was as, an extra challenge as I thought it would be. And in fact, I do recommend just adding 4 rows with your spine of peyote so that one of those rounds is the start to the first thing that you'll cast off of it. So you only have to take 4 rounds of peyote off, and it makes a lovely stable strip to finish. So I'll show that in a separate video. But for the meantime here, I'll just be adding 2 drop to this very long coil. Enjoy your 2-drop explorations and be sure and send in photographs of your work.